大家好, I'm Nathan Rich, aka 火锅大王. Today I want to ask you this question. What could be worse than Nazism? There's one word that is always a negative, always the worst thing you could possibly imagine, and that's Nazi. They killed a lot of people. They tried to take over the world, and the way that they killed people was painful and torturous. Those are really the three primary problems with Nazism. Nazism is a very, very dark and bad thing because it directly affected people in Europe, people in America. It was one of the most horrible systems ever devised. But there's something that could be viewed as worse than Nazism, depending on who you are. If you're Jewish, then probably the Holocaust is the worst thing that's happened to your people. So many people died in World War II that, in fact, members of my family have died in the Holocaust. My grandfather killed a Nazi at point blank with a pistol in France. So I'm very aware of the fact that Nazis were a real threat. The way that different countries view Nazism varies quite a bit, though. I remember once in Thailand I saw a swastika t-shirt for sale, and nobody seemed to care at all. And of course, in the 1970s, you had bands like the Sex Pistols, which would sometimes don swastika t-shirts to be offensive. And these days, anything that even hints at fascism or Nazism is very, very toxic. It harkens back to the times when many, many people died in horrible circumstances. But here in China, things are a little bit different because China wasn't really involved in World War II as much as the West was. Almost no one in China actually has died at the hands of Nazis. And so while obviously Chinese people realized that that was a bad regime that resulted in a lot of deaths, it didn't affect them as personally as it affected Europeans. Something else, though, has affected them that hasn't affected Europeans as much. The United States has been around since 1781, and some of the largest threats to its existence have included Nazism. But in that same time span in China, Nazism hasn't really played much of a role at all. The Nazis came to China very early on, and eventually they left. And there wasn't a lot of killing, there wasn't a lot of confrontation. But something else had a much bigger impact on the psyche of Chinese people. And that's been disunity by way of rebellion, by way of separatism, civil war. And those things combined have had an enormous effect on Chinese people. So much more than Nazism. At the time that America was pushing a gold rush to the West, China was involved with a massive internal war against this uprising of Christian Chinese people who were trying to create their own country inside of China and, of course, take over the rest of China. That war alone caused as many or more deaths than all of World War II in every country combined. Aside from just the Taiping Rebellion, there was also massive uprisings over the past many centuries. And just in the time that America has existed, around 10 times as many people have died from uprisings, rebellions, separatism, and infighting in China than all of Nazis ever killed. So if you think about how toxic it is to talk about Nazism in the West, you can start to understand how toxic it is to talk about rebellions and separatism and uprisings in China. It's a very similar emotional response that people have because they understand here that the number one problem to them in the past hasn't even been famine. It hasn't even been other countries invading them. It's really just been disunity amongst Chinese people. That has been responsible for far more deaths than anything else in Chinese history. This should help you imagine what it's like to have, for example, an uprising or a large separatist movement inside of China get support from another country. To them, it sort of feels like how you might expect it would feel to have a Nazi city inside of the United States getting support, even just moral support, from another country. The perception of threat level for that is similar to what you would perceive in the West from an entire city rising up with swastikas saying that they now want to start the Fourth Reich inside of America. That's how seriously they take it. For those of us who have taken the time to actually understand modern Chinese history and how they got to where they are now, it actually makes a lot of sense why the government reacts the way it does to separatism, disunity, rebellion, these types of things. Some level of it is accepted, but when they start to get the impression that this might actually dissolve the state in a certain area, they react very, very strongly. Just as in the West, some level of people being Nazis is tolerated, but if they started burning buildings down and attacking police officers, for example, that's when the crackdown comes. Is another component of that the government wants to keep control? Of course, that's how all governments operate. But there's something deeper about this particular issue with Chinese people, and almost no one from the West has recognized this. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen anyone actually put into proper context what it means to be China and to have a threat of a rebellion or a threat of separatism. So think about that the next time that you hear about separatism being kind of no big deal or deserved or why was it cracked down. It's more than just what it seems. There's a deep-rooted, logical fear of these things breaking out and getting out of control because it's happened in the past and tens of millions of people have died from it. I'm gonna keep talking about things like this and making small videos that explain how I see things, and hopefully you can use some of this information when you're thinking about and talking about the history of China and the modern politics of China. So thanks everybody. 谢谢.